Hi, folks. South Africa, about 1984. Reading an extract from my novel. Takes place on a border farm, the banks of the Limpopo River. It's owned by a white family called the Van Rensburgs. Eva's the daughter. And this section is the story of Lefu, who's the black man who works on the farm for them. And just prior to this excerpt, Eva has come up to Lefu and asked him to bury a dead jackal that has been shot several times. And so he does this for her. And then we pick up here. Lefu slept fitfully until the hour before dawn, when Lady's sharp bark woke him. He sat up in his narrow bed and listened. Someone was softly calling his name. He left the bed, lifted the sacking stretched across the small window, and saw Lucky and Lady wagging their tails in the middle of the tamped-down dirt clearing in front of the old stables. Again he heard his name. He pulled on a pair of old trousers and a shirt, stepped into his shoes, and quietly opened the door. The moonlit shadow of the old leadwood tree spilled toward him. Beneath the tree stood a ghostly horse with someone astride it. "Lefu," a small voice whispered, "I want you to come riding with me." It sounded like Eva, but she was asleep in the farmhouse. And even if she wasn't, she would not be near the old stables at this hour, and she would certainly never ask him to ride. Her father forbade it. Martin van Rensburg did not want a black man sitting on any of his horses. A snuffling sound rippled into the night, and the horse tossed his head in greeting. It was Eva and Casper. She beckoned him, and he moved through the night air until he reached the warm breath of the horse. Eva was riding bareback, and what she said astonished him. "I will give you money if you will ride into the bush with me and do me a favor." "Miss Eva, I cannot," Lefu whispered. "You know I am not allowed to ride, and soon, very soon, I must feed the horses, clean the stables. The boss will be very angry if I am late." "I have cleaned the stables, and my father will not know. He is drunk. I will give you 10 rand. As if she were certain that this amount had settled it, and Lefu would follow her, Eva tugged on the halter and urged the horse back toward the stable. And Lefu did. He found himself walking up the familiar footpath that each morning led his family back into the lives of the Van Rensburgs, his feet knowing just when to step over the knotted roots of the strangler fig, his hand reaching out to brush the leaves of his dying millies. Eva had lit a lamp at the stables, and in the center of the concrete floor he saw the wheelbarrow filled with soiled wood shavings. She slid off Casper, hurried into the tack room, and returned with a saddle and bridle that she handed to Lefu, saying, "Ride Donder." Bewildered, he stood there not moving. "Hurry," Eva urged, and she opened the stable door and motioned for him to enter. Donder butted his head against Lefu's chest, and he slipped the bit into the horse's soft, moist mouth, eased the saddle onto his back, and tightened the girth. "Let's go," Eva said, and she nudged Casper up the footpath. So many times Lefu had led the large, dark brown horse outside for Martin to ride. Now, as if in a dream, he put his foot in the stirrup and hiked himself up. Donder shuddered into a generous trot, and Lefu jostled in the saddle and gripped the horse's mane in terror. Perhaps Martin was not so drunk that he couldn't drive across the farm to search for his wayward daughter. If he saw a black man riding his horse at 5 a.m, he would shoot him, no questions asked. Half a mile down the dirt road, Eva veered onto a footpath snaking through the bush, and Lefu, still gripping Donder's mane, followed right behind her. He felt powerless to turn back, even to voice his fears. He was at Eva's mercy, and he was disoriented. The paths that he knew so well on foot looked different from astride a horse. He bounced in the saddle, briefly touching the rhythm, touching it again until suddenly he had slipped into it, a surging river of horse, and it felt familiar, easy, the way it had been when he was a youngster, pinching rides on the donkeys around the kraals, on sad, sway-backed horses that he pushed into ragged trots. The massive border fence loomed ahead. Eva urged Casper into a canter and turned onto the dirt track running parallel to the border. Lefu pressed his fists into Donder's neck, feeling the animal's warmth and sweat, its muscular legs eating up the earth. Faster and faster they rode until there was no separation between Lefu and Donder and the acres of land called Skinner's Drift. Somewhere, far behind, he slipped free of his tired, aching body and the sadnesses his heart had accumulated. "Naledi," he gasped when she finally reined in. He looked at her in a way that he would never look at her again. There was no past between them, no hint of their future, just a black man and a white girl who had shared an exhilarating ride together. For the briefest moment, Eva was radiant. "You ride well." Then her eyes flickered away from his. Lefu followed her gaze. In the long grass beneath the blackened branches of a tree that had been struck by lightning 2 years ago lay a tawny-colored caracal, a cat a little larger than a jackal, with tufts of long black hair on the tips of its ears. Dark clots of blood on its flank marked where several bullets had entered its body. Eva dismounted and squatted next to the animal, her hands hovering over it. "We need to take it back to the dam." She opened the leather saddlebag slung in front of Casper's saddle, retrieved a rope and a large piece of sacking, and handed them to Lefu. He was baffled as to why she wanted the animal's body, but having been taught never to question a white person, he didn't ask her, and he wrapped the caracal in the sacking. Eva stood a few feet away, watching him, the expression on her face one of sorrowful uncertainty. Lefu tried to lay the animal across Donda's back, but the horse snorted and shied away. "It's the blood. He does not like the smell, Miss Eva." He tried again, and with some coaxing he managed to tie the bundle behind the saddle. No sooner was he astride Donda than Eva said, "There are more." She trotted along the rutted track in the direction of the sandstone cliffs until she reached a cluster of fragrant water acacias. Beneath them, Lefu saw 2 jackals, and like the one he had buried several days ago, these animals had been shot numerous times. Eva took 2 more sacks out of her saddlebags, and he bundled the jackals into them, tying one onto Donder and the other onto Casper, who was quieter and didn't flinch. In the dawn light, they cantered for most of their return, a circuitous route that took them far away from the kraals of the other workers. They reined in when they reached the clearing alongside the empty dam, where just a few days ago Eva had asked him to bury the first jackal. "I hid a spade near the last row of tomato plants. Bury them." Lefu dismounted and quickly untied the 3 bundles. "Hurry," Eva urged, and she trotted back to the stable, leading Donder by the reins. It was almost 6 o'clock, and already the sun felt too hot. Beyond the tomato fields, Lefu saw the dust and thirst of the land. He sank to his knees, horrified by what he had just done. A hyena standing on its hind legs, walking into the big house and pouring itself a drink, was no more of an aberration than Lefu galloping across Martin van Rensburg's farm on Martin van Rensburg's horse. With the drumbeat of hooves still reverberating in his body, he pressed his forehead to the earth and begged God's forgiveness. Flies were already gathering on the 3 sacks, and he found the spade, walked 10 paces from where he had buried the first jackal, and began to dig. 2 feet deep, and the earth was bone dry. The movement quieted his heart. Just dig, just work, he kept telling himself. Eva reappeared on Casper as she was shoveling earth on the caracal. In a businesslike fashion, she gave him the 10 rand note, You know, my father is shooting these animals, she said before she rode away. Thanks.
You can watch